Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Political Hitman. I'm Howie Silberger, your political hitman here on Israel News Talk Radio. You could join me in the chat room at israelnewstalkradio.com, where the conversation is always great, and I'd love to hear from you. You could call in. It is a call-in show, so feel free to call in. Numbers to call in North America, 301-768-4841. In Israel, 0265000151. So, we have been living through a very strange period, an extremely strange period of time. And doing the prep for this show, I always take a look around the world and see what kind of Jewish news is happening around the world. As most regular listeners know, I don't particularly cover Israeli politics all that much. I usually deal with other things. And so I was looking at news from around the world. And the thing that shocked me is how many Jews are being attacked around the world. I just put in Jewish news into Google. I don't normally do that. I usually have a bunch of sites I go and I visit. But today I decided, let's just check out Jewish news, just general topic, Jewish news. And the first 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20 entries that I saw are Jews being attacked around the world, everywhere from Warsaw to California. So one has to wonder, what do we do about this? One has to wonder, should we be concerned as Jews, as people, as humans? Should we be concerned about this? One has to wonder, how much time do we allow this to happen before we go and we do something about it? And is there anything that we can do about it? It's the question. I'm Howie Silberger. This is Political Hitman here on Israel News Talk Radio. You could feel free to join me in the chat room, israelnewstalkradio.com. You could call in. The numbers are in North America, 301-768-4841. In Israel, the number is 0265000151. I'm Howie Silberger. This is Political Hitman on Israel News Talk Radio.
The return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel was prophesied in the Bible thousands of years ago and is coming true today. Shalom. Join me, Josh Wander, on Israel Unplugged. Listen in as we delve into the spiritual and physical aspects of the Jewish return to Zion. We'll discuss the biblically mandated, historic, and of course practical understandings of this incredible transition from exile to redemption. That's Israel Unplugged, every Monday on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com.
Political Hitman. I'm Howie Silberger, your political hitman here on Israel News Talk Radio. Feel free to give me a call. 301-768-4841 in North America. In Israel, the number is 0265000151. You could, of course, join me in the chat room at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. I'm always monitoring the chat the entire show. It is always fascinating what happens in the chat room. So feel free to join me in the chat room at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. So I'm trying to understand why Jews are being attacked around the world. Now I know Jew hatred is the constant. It's been the constant since the creation of the Jews, since the forming of the Jewish nation, and it has been the constant over the centuries. So Jew hatred doesn't surprise me. I'm just wondering why it flares up and how it flares up every now and then, and now it seems to be flaring up around the world. This Jew hatred seems to be spreading rather than being contained, and I'm wondering why. And when you look at the stories, and I look at the story. I read the stories. I don't just talk about headlines because headlines are always deceiving. So I actually read the stories. And when you look at the stories, there seems to be a common thread, at least this time, on what's causing this Jew hatred. And the common thread is Israel. The state of Israel is the common thread. Now, why the state of Israel is causing this Jew hatred is up for debate. So the big debatable point here is the state of Israel causing the Jew hatred around the world, or is the state of Israel being used as an excuse for the Jew haters to express their hatred around the world? This is the question this is the question we have to ponder, because we all know that Jew hatred existed before the founding of the state of Israel. We all know that Jew hatred has existed for centuries and centuries and centuries, and so is it the state of Israel and the politics of the state of Israel and the defense of the state of Israel that is causing this hatred, or is it perhaps something else? Now, I took this under consideration, grave consideration, all week. I've been thinking about this for a while, and then when I googled Jewish news today, just as a little bit of prep for the show, and I saw all these listings of attacks on Jews everywhere from London to New York, I started wondering why. This is the question I keep asking myself. Why? And so I started talking to some friends and some advocates for Israel and some people that I know, and I asked them, "Hey, listen, why do you think Jews are being attacked around the world?" And one after another, they explained to me, well, since Hamas attacked Israel and Israel retaliated, it flared up tensions between Israelis and their neighbors. And when that happens, it always spills over into the rest of the world, and it manifests itself in Jew hatred. And I was thinking, that is an extremely interesting point when you think about it. Extremely interesting. Because Israel haters, people who oppose Zionism, or I'm anti-Zionist, always use the line, I'm anti-Zionist, but I'm not anti-Jewish. I have nothing against the Jewish people. Arafat said that. We heard that. I have nothing against the Jewish people. I just don't like Zionists. I think Zionists are imperialistic colonialists, but the Jewish people are nice people. This is what we keep hearing. And there's no equivalence between Judaism and Zionism. Is a mantra that's repeated over and over again by these Jew haters and these Zionist haters and these Israel haters. But they are lying to you, and they're lying to me, and they're lying straight to our faces. They are a bunch of liars. And because they are lying to us, and because the world is naive enough to believe them, we see these rampant attacks on Jews around the world based on something happening in Israel. Let's say, this war between Hamas and Israel that has been raging for weeks already. When we see that happen and then Jews get attacked around the world, it's interesting that their entire argument falls apart, that we're only anti-Zionist, we're not anti-Israel. That falls apart immediately. And nobody seems to care that falls apart, because then they just keep repeating it over and over again. And so you get to the point where everything they say is a lie. And then it keeps getting proven over and over again that that's the lie, that the lie is that anti-Zionism is not anti-Jewism. It's a complete lie. Because when you look at stuff that happened in, let's say, right here, I'll use this article as an example. So it's from the Jewish News in Britain, in the United Kingdom. 4 arrested after car convoy filmed yelling, F Jews rape their daughters. That's what they were yelling out of their cars, flying Arab flags, flying the flag that they claim is the flag of the people who call themselves Palestinians. They yelled F Jews and rape their daughters. Okay, now as horrific as that is, as horrific as what they were yelling is, the fact that they were flying these flags, these political flags, is indicative that they were opposing the fight between Hamas and Israel. So they were flying these political flags this altered flag that the Egyptian Arafat decided to adopt when they built this people that were built to usurp Israel, people that were built to destroy Israel, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. So flying the Palestinian Liberation Organization flag and yelling, "F Jews, rape their daughters," not F Israelis, not free Palestine, not stop killing our children, or whatever stupid slogan they want to use, which is lies. I mean, whatever lying slogan they want to use. But F the Jews and rape their daughters. The raping their daughter thing is quite interesting. We could look at that some other time. But the F the Jew thing is interesting. Because when they say, we're not anti-Jewish, we're just anti-Zionist, then why F the Jews? Then why in New York, if a Hasidic Jew is walking down the street in New York City and he gets attacked and they yell "Free Palestine" when they attack him, why is a Jew in New York City being attacked over a skirmish happening in the Middle East? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense if you pay attention and you listen to what they're arguing. It doesn't make sense if you believe the anti-Jewites. It doesn't make sense. If you believe the anti-Zionists, then all these attacks on Jews don't make sense. So one has to think that there is an intricate connection between the Jews of North America and the Jews of Europe and the Jews of the diaspora and the state of Israel. One has to think that they're connected somehow. That somehow, even if Jews, secular Jews and assimilated Jews don't want to admit that there's a connection between them and Israel, the rest of the world sees it. We have to assume that, much like many other indigenous people who lived in a land and were destroyed by occupiers, Jews are feeling the same kind of oppression as some of the other indigenous people that were destroyed by other generations of settlers and people who stole land. So, the difference here, and let's be clear about what the difference is. The difference here between the Jewish indigenous people of the Middle East, the indigenous people who lived in Judea in the Middle East, and other indigenous people, is that the people who are connected to the land, the Jewish people who have been dispersed around the diaspora, that's why Jews live in the diaspora, because they were thrown out of their land and they were dispersed around the world. The Jews living around the world are beaten up and are still attacked and still persecuted because they are trying to reclaim land that is rightfully theirs. That's the difference between the Jewish indigenous people and other indigenous people. If you think about North American indigenous people, all the lefties, all the crazy radical left, stand up and scream about governments and the extreme injustice that was committed against these people, and nobody's minimizing that injustice, but they stand up and they scream about the extreme injustice committed against the people, the Amerindians, the native people who lived in Americas before the Europeans came and stole the land, and somehow the guilt of taking their land is very palatable in North America and very, very palatable amongst the left, but they don't feel the same way about the land that was taken from the Jewish people. It's quite interesting that certain indigenous people, certain people who were native to a certain land, have a higher, and this is new woke societies like this, they have a higher victimhood rating than the Jewish people do. Which is fascinating because the Jewish people have been victims for centuries. The Jewish people have been murdered, massacred, thrown into ovens, thrown into gas chambers for centuries. And yet the left never seemed to care about the plight of the Jewish people. I remember when I was a kid, and the United Nations Emergency Relief Fund, UNICEF, the Children's Relief Fund, used to go around and they used to collect money around Halloween time. Around the end of October, they used to run around and collect money. Ding dong, ring your bell. Hey, could you donate to UNICEF? We help We help kids who are in need around the world. There's no politics involved. We just help everybody who needs help. And it always turned out they helped everybody, all the children who needed help, except for Jewish children, except for Israeli children. Those children didn't matter, but everybody else mattered. If another child needed help, some starving kid in Ethiopia, wow, they were there for him. But not for Jewish children. So it's interesting that the left prioritizes victimhood, and the Jews seem to fall on the bottom of the ladder. I'm Howie Silverger. This is Political Hitman. We'll be back in just a moment.
Hi everyone, this is Andrea Simento from Jerusalem, inviting you to drop everything and join me on my show, Pull Up a Chair. We'll visit this week's quirky stories, meet fabulous guests, and discover my Israel. Together we'll laugh, shout, and explain the topics that make us say, hey, we've got to talk about that. So get comfortable and pull up a chair with me, Andrea Simento, every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Political Hitman. I'm Howie Silverger. This is Political Hitman here on Israel News Talk Radio. Feel free to join me on the air. Give me a call. Numbers to call 301-768-4841 if you're in North America. If you're in Israel, the number is 0265000151. You could, of course, join me in the chat room at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com, where the conversation's always fascinating, and I'm always monitoring. I'm watching the conversation, and I will bring you any interesting comments that are made in the chat room right here on the air on Israel News Talk Radio. So Jews are being beaten up, and Jews are being attacked around the world, and even after a ceasefire was called and hostilities have cooled between Israel and Hamas, not saying they've ended because the rocket barrages never end, but the media has cooled off their reporting on it because, gosh forbid they should report on Hamas and their hatred towards their own people and towards Israel. The attacks on Jews have continued. And this is what's worrisome. In the experience that I have, I've covered terrorism. I covered terrorism for over a decade for a couple of major newspapers. And I work closely with a lot of terrorism experts. So my understanding of how terrorism works and how the terrorist mind works is pretty high. I understand how it works. And in my estimation, and my understanding is that once they start attacking, once they activate themselves and they start attacking people in a certain area, they continue to attack in that area. This is something that happens all the time. We saw it in France, where many Jews had to flee France. They just left their homes and they left their businesses, and they ran to Israel because the attack started and they never stopped. We see it happening in Britain. We see it starting to happen in the United States now, where Jews are being attacked on a regular basis. Last summer, every show, we talked about Jews in New York City being attacked in broad daylight and the government of New York doing nothing. At the beginning of COVID, we saw the government of New York, we saw the mayor of New York and the governor of New York scapegoat Jews over the spread of COVID. We saw them use pictures of Jews praying as the picture of people who spread COVID, of hotspots for COVID, at press conferences. They used pictures of Jews. So when you start seeing this kind of thing happening around the world, and you start seeing governments getting in on the act, and the media kind of egging it on, and they do egg it on, the attacks on Jews in North America could be directly linked to media articles that have appeared in major mainstream newspapers, articles that have lied about what Israel did in defense for the Hamas attack. They called it retaliation. It wasn't retaliation; it was self-defense. But no one ever used the word self-defense because retaliation sounds a lot better when you want to frame Israel as the bad guy. So self-defense was never appeared in any mainstream newspaper in North America. So when we think about the way they frame the Israel-Hamas conflict, and I put Israel first because the conflict is not so much with Hamas and Israel, it's more with Israel and Hamas. And the reason I say it's more of Israel and Hamas, not because Israel's the aggressor, but Hamas's problem with Israel's existence is the root of the problem there. And Hamas's problem with Israel's existence, as we've spoken about before on the show, is not so much that Israel exists in the Middle East, but that it's a Jewish country that exists there. If Israel were a Muslim country, it wouldn't matter. But when you see the media and the government start to stack up against the Jews, we can only look back at history and understand where the next step is. We can only look back at history and understand that it doesn't stop at random attacks on Jews in the street. And I'm not even saying that we should go back to the Holocaust and look how the Holocaust started and understand the similarities between the beginnings of the Holocaust and the situation happening now. Because I don't think that's a fair comparison, because at the time of the Holocaust, when the Holocaust started, the state of Israel did not exist and wasn't the strongest army in the Middle East. And the state of Israel did not have a reputation and an obligation to protect Jews everywhere. So I'm not going to say that this is the start of another Holocaust. What I'm going to say is that this is the start. This could be the start, and it seems to be the seeds of another, perhaps, eviction of Jews from a foreign land. This could be the seeds of another potential genocide, God forbid, or another potential series of pogroms against the Jewish people. And we've seen those kind of pogroms, those kind of attacks, those kind of organized attacks against the Jews for centuries. And it always starts with the government and the media ganging up against the Jewish people and riling up the population to attack the Jews. So we might be heading into something like that. And if we are heading into something like that, then Jews are in trouble in North America and in Europe and around the world, in Australia, and need to be saved. Thank God Israel still exists. Thank God Israel exists. Thank God Israel exists. I'll say it 3 times because it's an important thing to say. Without Israel, Jews would be in major trouble. They're already in major trouble. They'd be in much greater major trouble without the state of Israel. So it brings us back to, what is the root of all this Jew hatred? Why are Jews the most hated people in the world? And why does that hatred keep jumping up and manifesting itself time and time and time again? So I floated the theory a while back, and I'm gonna float it again right now, because I think this theory is the actual reason why this is happening. So we know that the war in between the world and Israel is not a political war. We understand that the war between the world and Israel is a religious war, and it's a war that is being waged by an imperialistic religion that believes that any land they conquer belongs to them forever, which, by the way, would probably be against all forms of international law. But we'll put that aside for now because nobody seems to care about that, unless, of course, it pertains to Israel. But so we understand it's not a political war. We understand it's not a. We understand that it is a religious war. We understand that the religions that are fighting, Islam and Judaism, and notice I didn't say Israel. I said Judaism because that's what the war is. It's not between Islam and Israel. It's between Islam and Judaism. And the problem with Judaism is that Jews are running the state of Israel, and therefore Jews are infidels, not Israelis. Jews are infidels, and Jews must be destroyed, which is why Jews are being attacked outside of the state of Israel, which is why Jews are being attacked in Australia, which is why Jews are being attacked in North America, which is why Jews are being attacked on the opposite end of the world where Israel exists, because it has nothing to do with the politics of Israel. It has to do with the politics of Judaism and the Jewish claim to the land. Now, we understand that this is the problem. And so when we talked before about the idea that when the Christians took over and came out and when they created themselves as a sect of Judaism, then they broke off from Judaism and Christianity was created. They came up with something they called the New Testament. So the Torah and the accepted Bible, the Bible was handed down by God to Moses and then given off to the people. The handed down Bible was what was now replaced in the Christian mind. The handed down Bible was now replaced by the New Testament with God. So the Jews had the Old Testament, which is terminology Jews should never use, by the way. But the Jews had the Old Testament, and now Christianity had the New Testament. And the New Testament had to replace the Old Testament. The problem Christians had was there were still people who believed in the Old Testament. There were still people who believed in the covenant between God and the Jewish people. And so how did the Christians react to that? Crusades. Convert or die. They had crusades in the Middle Ages. Then they had the Spanish Inquisition, where if you didn't want to convert and expose your faith to Christianity, you had to die. We had to kill you. And so that was their solution: wipe out the Jewish people, because the more you kill or the more you convert forcefully or otherwise, the less people believe in the original covenant with God, and the more people will believe that the new covenant is the proper one. Listen, if more people believe in the new covenant than believe in the old covenant, then what legitimacy does the old covenant have? There's more to this theory, and we'll get to it when we come back. I want you to join me in the chat room at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. I want you to feel free to call in. In North America, the number is 301-768-4841. In Israel, the number is 02-650-0151. I'm Howie Silbiger. This is Political Hitman right here on Israel News Talk Radio. It is. I want you to call in, please. Call in, be part of the show.
Are you interested in transforming your life, drawing closer to the Creator, and uncovering the deeper meanings and hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
And me, William Hall,
on the Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Hello, I am Walter Bingham. If you want to hear the news behind the news and the true perspective on world affairs, then the Walter Bingham File is the program for you. We bring you interviews with the movers and shakers, political commentaries, and on-the-spot reports of events as they happen. All here every Tuesday, 4 p.m. Israel time, 9 a.m. Eastern time. And it's all archived on our website. Make it a date.
Political Hitman. I'm Howie Silbiger, your political hitman here on Israel News Talk Radio. Feel free to join me in the chat room at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. You could call in. The number to call, 301-768-4841 in North America. In Israel, the number is 02-650-0151. Of course, those numbers are readily available, and you could find them on the top of the page on Israel News Talk Radio. So we were talking about the theory on why Jews are the most hated people in the world, and continuously the hated people in the world. And I was telling you about Christianity and the New Testament, that they claimed they had a New Testament with God, and the New Testament replaced the Old Testament. And because the New Testament replaced the Old Testament, we had to get rid of the people who believed in the Old Testament. This is what Christians thought. Because if there are people who believe in the Old Testament, it takes away from the legitimacy of the new one. How could you have a new covenant with God when people still believe in the old one? So they developed evangelicals who went around and they tried to convert Jews to Christianity. When they saw that didn't work, they sent their knights out. The king sent their knights out to force Jews and then Muslims to convert to Christianity, because if you don't believe in the Christian version of events, the Christian Bible, then you're a heretic and you have to be killed. So they would kill people who didn't want to convert. And they continued their campaign to convert Jews and anybody else who didn't believe in the Christian Bible till today. I mean, the campaign's still going. Evangelical Christians, that's their whole mission. The entire Christian right that supports Israel, and the entire Christian right which vehemently supports Israel, does so with a purpose. It's not because they have this altruistic love for the Jewish people and the state of Israel, even though that's what they claim. That's not the actual point of why they support Israel. The reason they support Israel, and we could be very clear on this because it's the reason. The reason they support Israel is because the book of Revelations states quite clearly that all Jews have to go back to Israel, and when all Jews are in Israel, the second coming of their Messiah will happen, and then all people who don't believe in the Messiah and in their God will burn in hell. That's the concept. So either everybody will mass convert and realize that the New Testament with God between the Christians and God, that will realize that was the real testament, and they will realize it, and they will throw themselves on their knees and beg for forgiveness, or a big gaping hole to hell will open up and everybody will fall in. So that's the book of Revelations, and that's what they believe in. And that is why you have today you have evangelicals and the whole right, the Christian right, that is so supportive of the Jews returning to Israel. That's their ultimate goal. So we have to keep that in mind. Now, I know that many Israel advocates have told me they don't mind the end goal of the Christians, doesn't bother them, as long as the Christians are supporting Israel and politically helping push Israel and financially helping push Israel. This doesn't sit well with me, but this is how many Israel advocates believe that we should exploit them and their religious nature in order to take advantage of their political power. I don't personally subscribe to that. I think Israel and Jews could stand on their own. And so when Islam came around, they had a third testament with God, a new deal, let's call it. So a new testament. So you had the Old Testament, which the Christians labeled the Torah, was the Old Testament. Then the Christians had their New Testament, which was the Bible. And then they created the Quran, and the Quran became the New Testament. And so what happens when you have a New Testament, and there are still people believing in the previous New Testament and then the original Testament? We have to go and kill them, right? So Islam is the newest religion out of the three. It's probably the largest one at the moment, but it is the newest one out of the three. And it's still in its growing stage. Believe it or not, religions take centuries to grow into what they are. And so Islam is still in the growing stage. And if you look at the amount of time between the founding of Islam and the creation of Islam and today, you will see that that the amount of time between the creation of Islam and today, and the Islamic attack on everybody who doesn't believe in Islam, is around the same amount of years as when the Christians started their crusades after the creation of Christianity. So you realize that religions work in cycles, and this is the cycle. This is the cycle of religions. So Islam is at the point now where they are trying to prove that even though they probably have the most amount of followers in the world, they're still trying to prove that their New Testament is actually the Testament with God. Even if it might not be conscious, this is the goal. The end goal is that this is the testament to God, and everything else is invalid and has to be destroyed. It's the same concept as the Christian Crusades and the same concept of the Spanish Inquisitions, and the Jews are always the brunt of this because the Jews are the ones that hold up they hold the flag for Torah and for Torah values and for the original testament with God, and in my opinion, the only testament with God. They're the ones who hold up the flag, and so since they're the ones who are holding up the flag for truth, for the Torah and for the covenant with God, they're the ones who have to be attacked around the world. And this is the reason why it doesn't matter what the catalyst is. So when Israel didn't exist, Jews were still being attacked. When Israel did exist, then Israel's being used as an excuse to attack Jews. And the reason that Jews are being attacked around the world has very little to do with the existence of the state of Israel, has very little to do with the Arab-Israel conflict, and has a lot more to do with the religious conflict between Islam and Judaism. And this is an argument I make a lot, and this is an argument that gets thrown back at me, and people scream at me, saying, Howie, you're crazy. You live in the past. Howie, what are you talking about? We have to look at the geopolitical situation today. We have to look at the at international law and the United Nations, and they throw all this political stuff at me. And while I understand the politics of it too, I have advanced degrees in political science. I understand the politics of it. At the end of the day, when you want to get down to the root of the problem, when you want to get down to the core issue, and that's really what you should always try to do in any conflict, is find the core issue. What is the seed of the conflict? How do you resolve the conflict? Everyone tells me that the conflict in the Middle East is unresolvable. And this has been the mantra for 70 years. It is not true. It is not true. It is solvable. But you have to understand, and you have to realize what the problem is. If the problem was a land problem, it would have been solved years ago. We know that because a whole lot of offers were made and land was turned down. So it's not a land problem. If it was a problem with the existence of the state of Israel, then they could have negotiated Israel out of existence years ago. That didn't happen. So it didn't happen for a reason, because land is not the issue. Muslims believe that the land that Israel sits on is Islamic land because it was Islamic. It was land ruled under an Islamic caliphate. So an Islamic leader ruled the land, owned the land, which means the land becomes Islamic forever. Anybody who's not Islamic, who sets up a country in land that was Islamic land, according to the Quran, is an infidel, is an illegitimate government, and must be destroyed. Period. That is the root of the Arab-Israel conflict. Period. There is nothing else. That is the root. Now, how do you resolve something like that? It's difficult to resolve religious conflict. But that is the root, and that is why there have been wars there for thousands of years. That's why there have been attacks on Jews and attacks on everybody there by Muslims for centuries. Because it's not having to do with the state of Israel. And anybody who wants to argue that it does have something to do with the state of Israel, I invite you onto the show with me. You come here and argue with me. But that is the root of the problem. That is why every Arab leader has walked away from deals that Israel has tried to make, where their only obligation was to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. Because they couldn't recognize Israel as a Jewish state, it would go against their religion. It would be a violation of their belief in Islam. And they would be killed by Islamic radicals. So, if you want a solution to the Middle East problem, it's not simple at all, but you have to find a religious solution to the Middle East problem. It has to be a deal between the religions, not a deal between countries. A deal between countries is absolutely pointless because it can never be upheld. Because as long as this religious obligation exists as an undercurrent, any political deals that are made could never be maintained. It's a scary proposition. It's unfortunate, and it explains why Israel has never been able to achieve peace with their Islamic neighbors, and it also explains why Jews are beaten up and attacked and constantly bothered outside of the state of Israel when it comes to dealing with politics inside the state of Israel. And that's the reason. And so, if you want to argue this, and you want to actually fight and advocate for Israel, we have to stop looking at the political and the geopolitical point of view. You have to start looking at the religious point of view. And people who are anti-religion, people who don't believe in religion, have to understand that fervent believers in religion have this problem, and this is what is the root cause of the conflict in the Middle East. This is why Jews are being killed in the Middle East. This is why Jews are being killed outside of the Middle East, with the Middle East being used as an example. This is why, as an excuse. And this is why we will never come to a solution until we can come to some kind of religious agreement. That's it. I want to thank you for listening. I'll be back next week. I'm Howie Subberger. This is Political Hitman on Israel News Talk Radio.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
If you're hearing this message, everyone else can too. Advertise with Israel News Talk Radio and get your message out to people. We'll build a personalized package for you. Contact advertising at israelnewstalkradio.com.
Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey, this is Jake in Anchorage, Alaska, and I love listening to all the super interesting interviews and up-to-date information on what's happening in Israel.
Hello, this is Anna King, originally from London, now living in Israel. And what can I say? Israel News Talk Radio is my cup of tea.
My name is Bhaskar. I'm from India, and I love listening because you get to know the truth and wonderful voices from this lovely country.
Mom! Okay, wait a minute. Hi, this is Chava Dax, and I'm calling from the rolling hills of Ma'ale Adumim, just north of Jerusalem. I always listen to Israel News Talk Radio to get all the latest news and commentary and to keep me up to date every day.
This is Sarah Dax from Ma'ale Adumim, and I'm 12. I wish Israel News Talk Radio was boring so my mom wouldn't listen to it all the time. Mom!
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.